Hey there guys, and welcome to the next tutorial here on the Ducttapestuff channel. This is a request I got a long time ago, probably when I first started the channel, and if you guys have been paying attention to the channel for the past couple weeks, I have been hinting that I have been working on duct tape shoes, and I just really wanted to put that into a tutorial, so that's pretty much what we're going to be going over in this tutorial. It's going to be a pretty epic video, it's going to be a pretty long tutorial, but bear with me, it's probably going to be pretty good, and we'll be actually show you how to make your duct tape shoes. Let me show you my first prototype pair which I made here. This is pretty much what we're going to be making in the tutorial here. They are the high top shoes, which was the most requested form of shoe to make, so that's exactly what we're going to be making. You'll notice that each one is a little bit different. I actually made both of these slightly different ways, so to see what would come out the best. So they definitely do work. So let's get started here. So I'm going to take you over to my workstation, go over some tips before we get started, and then we'll start making duct tape shoes. So let's head over there now. Alright, so before we get started here, we're going to be going over some tips about the shoes before we really, dive headfirst into this project. First, number one is that shoes are a difficult thing to make. Now, if this is your first thing that you're trying to make out of duct tape, I would really recommend that you try to get some more experience with it first, just because the shoes have a lot of rounded curves, and when you're working with rounded curves with duct tape, it is a lot more difficult than working with, just straight lines, like if you were making a wallet or something like that. So if this is your first project, I would expect to get some experience first before you dive headfirst into shoes. The second thing I wanted to explain is that the shoes do take a decent amount of duct tape. I think I wasn't really paying too much attention to how much tape it used up, but I would say it's probably at least 10 yards, maybe close to 15 yards total for a pair of shoes. So you just want to keep that in mind. If you have a solid roll, you're probably going to need just about that much. So we'll see how that goes, but it definitely takes a decent amount of tape. Two things I'm not going to be going over in this tutorial are how to make the shoelaces, because I do have a tutorial up on how to do that, a mini tutorial, and I will be linking that in an annotation when we do come to that point, as well as I won't be showing you how to make a duplicate shoe, because the shoes are made exactly the same way, so once you make the one shoe, you're just going to duplicate the process over to make the other one. So what I would recommend that you do is, when you're following these instructions, to take the one part of the step that you're making on the one shoe, put that one aside once you complete that step, and then do the exact same step on the other shoe, and this will kind of make sure that the two shoes end up identical at the end, or close to identical, which is what you're going to make. Let's see here. It's also a difficult project in the terms that it might make you think a little bit, because unlike a wallet or something like that, it's going to make you think maybe I should put an extra strip here, maybe I need to cut a little bit to make it more rounded, or stuff like that. So if it's not working out for you, it might make you think a little bit just of what you can do, maybe problem solve a little bit to make sure that the shoes do come out well. So once you take all those tips into consideration, we're going to start making our shoe here. Alright, so I did mention it before, but this actually is going to be a hybrid tutorial, because we are going to be using cardboard for the bottom soles of the shoes. I will talk about using foam later on towards the end, because you actually can use foam as well to give yourself a little bit of support. I'm just using the fairly thin cardboard here, which is, it's probably like a little less than a quarter-inch thick. It really doesn't matter what size cardboard you use. I probably wouldn't use the really thin sheet stuff that's not much thicker than a sheet of paper, but I would definitely use something that's got a little bit of thickness in between, because it's just going to give you a little more comfort, because it's going to compact just a little bit when you step down on it. So your first step, what you're going to do is put your feet down on a piece of cardboard. You're going to trace out your foot, and then you're simply going to cut out those pieces. Now you'll notice I actually gave a little bit of a room around the side here. I actually cut everything out to about it's about a ½ inch more, and I obviously I didn't cut into where the actual toes are. I just made it one giant rounded edge, and that's basically what you want to do. So I gave myself about a ½ inch. So basically just do that for yourself, and then make sure it's almost all rounded all the way around. You don't want to get too many straight lines. You want it to be more or less completely rounded. So do that for both your right and your left foot, and you'll have your two cardboard pieces here, and then we'll start putting some duct tape on here, and you'll really get started on making our shoe. So do this step right now. Alright, so our first step, what we're going to do is we're going to start making a trim that's going to line all the way around the sides of the shoe. And to do that, we're going to cut out a whole bunch of strips. I'm going to work on this side first. Obviously, this is my right foot here, my right shoe. It's going to be my right shoe. I cut out strips that are 10 inches long, because that's roughly the length between where the big toe starts up here to about where it starts curving for the heel. And basically, the measurements are going to be different, because obviously, your feet aren't going to be exactly the same size as mine, but you're going to cut out 3 of those strips that are about roughly that size from the start of the big toe to about the back where the heel starts to curve. So you're going to take 2 of these strips, And don't worry too much about the gray because we'll have plenty of time to decorate with all kinds of different colors later, so don't worry too much about that. So we take our first 2 strips, we stick them together just like that. We're going to take our third and overlap by, it's about 1/4 inch or so, so stick that down. Next what we're going to do is flip this whole piece over like this. Take your shoe here, and you're actually going to line it up on an angle. And you're going to line it up so that about 1/2 inch of this piece here, when you fold it up, like you're making a wall, it's going to be about a 1/2 inch high. So we're going to stick that down right about there. And don't worry about if it's a little bit higher here, because it's, as long as it's a 1/2 inch on the parts, you know, like where it sticks out the farthest, which would be right here and right here, you're going to be fine. So flip the whole thing over and stick it down on the back here. This whole part is going to be covered eventually with tape, so don't worry about covering up that. So if you take it here, you should be able to peel this up, and it should roughly be about a 1/2 inch all the way around. Don't worry about, you know, if it's curving a little bit, we're going to fix that pretty shortly. So if you just fold it up just like this, you should have about 1/2 inch, like a 1/2 inch wall around the side. So once we have that part done, we're actually going to flip it over, and we're going to do the same thing on this side. So we're going to do that step next. So now we're going to work on this side over here, and I cut out 3 more strips that are, these are actually 9 inches long. They're 1 inch smaller than the ones over there. Obviously these measurements are always going to be different, because unless you have like the exact same size feet as me, you're going to be cutting out different size strips. But you just want it to be basically roughly the exact same size. So if you drew a straight line across, you know, you got one coming to here all the way to about the front here. So we're going to take our first 2 strips and we're going to stick them together just like this. Doing the exact same thing that we just did, we're going to just stick this, overlap it by about 1/4 inch or so. Flip the whole thing over, and now obviously we're going to do it on this side. This side is going to be a little bit trickier just because obviously there's a lot more curves here than there is on this side. This side's a lot straighter. So basically what you want to do is line it up. This is also going to be on an angle, so kind of line it up like on a slant like that. This part and this part back here are going to be the 2 ones that stick out the most, so you want to make sure there's about 1/2 inch there. About 1/2 inch, that's going to wrap up, and obviously this will be more than 1/2 inch, but that's fine. So once you've got roughly about there, you're going to stick it down, flip the whole thing over, make sure that it's nice and stuck down on the cardboard. Definitely make sure that you do make sure it's lined up, because if you do stick something down the cardboard and then make a mistake and have to peel it up, you're going to peel up a whole bunch of cardboard, you know, material surface with it. So you definitely want to make sure that you do it right on the first time. So now if I wrap this up, even though it's a little curved, it's definitely at least a 1/2 inch, with a little bit more on some places, which is fine. So now we're going to do a little bit of trimming to make sure that that all curves a little bit better, and we're going to take a few little strips and make sure that, you know, that all attaches better, so it doesn't curve like this piece does, like right here. So let's do that step now. Oh, so here comes the first part where it's going to make you think a little bit. Now, obviously, when you peel this part up, it obviously curves at several different points because the cardboard is curved underneath it. Some parts are a little bit higher than others and stuff like that. What you want to do is take your scissors and you want to trim usually right in the middle of the curve. Just like make a big cut right there in the center. And you're going to trim this into different pieces so that when you wrap it up on the sides here and connect them, it's going to curve with the duct tape. Oh, I'm sorry, with the cardboard piece rather. So you're going to cut in those different places, and I'll show you what I mean here in just a sec. So when you peel this part up, since it's cut there, it's now able to flex much easier. And you take those 2 pieces, they'll overlap usually by just a little bit. If not, you can just kind of use your imagination. Take a small strip and just stick it down right there, and basically what you're doing is just connecting those 2. So now they're connected, but obviously they're able to flex because they have that one part that was cut out. So you're going to take another piece here and do the exact same thing here. This part's probably not going to overlap a little bit, which is perfectly alright. So you're just going to go like this and then stick it down just like that. Don't worry too much about neatness at this point, because most of this is actually going to be covered up, so you don't have to worry about making it look really pretty at this point. So obviously we have this cut here, which is going to overlap for us. And make sure you're sticking it down so that, that's the part of the cardboard underneath. That's like where the rim is for the cardboard. Don't worry about the wrinkles on the bottom, because no one's going to see that except for the grass or the road that you're walking on. So don't worry about that too much. So now curving this around, we have this one last piece up here. So make sure that that is stuck down. It's going to be a little tricky, but definitely just work with it until you get it. So there we go. So now when we curve this up, it should curve a whole lot better just because it has all those little cuts and it's more fitted to the way the cardboard curves. So now what we're going to do is do the exact same thing on this side. So this side should be a little bit easier just because there aren't as many curves. So you're just probably going to make one or two because they're mostly straight lines through here. And then you're just going to connect those exactly the same way that I just connected these over here. So do that step now. So now you have both of that side trim on your first shoe here, and so this would be a very good time to take your other one here and then do the exact same step that I just showed you, those same two sheets, and then stick them on the back here and wrap around just the way I showed you on your shoe here. So you remember, when you're making these shoes, you want them to be more or less exactly identical, and the only way to do that is to do one step on one and then do the exact same step on the other to try and make them as close together as possible. So once you got those two on, I would take your other shoe, do the exact same method, put those two on the sides, do a little cutting, and then take those little strips and stick them on with this shoe here. And then we'll move on to our next step. So now we're going to work on doing the back part of the shoe here. So this is part where the heel is. We're going to do it exactly the same way. Usually I cut out strips that are about roughly the same length as if you were to measure this point here across. For me it's about 4 inches, but remember it's going to be totally different for you depending on the size of your shoe. So I have obviously those 3 strips. I'm going to take the first 2, stick them together just like this. And this is probably going to be one of the more difficult segments just because this part of the shoe, the heel, is the most rounded part as well as the front. So this is going to be a little more difficult. But if you were able to do these two on the sides fairly well, then you're probably going to be able to do the back fairly well as well. So line up at the top, the very back here with about 1/2 inch showing. Stick it down, then flip the whole thing over, make sure it's definitely on the back. And as you can tell, we're definitely pretty much covering the entire bottom part of the shoe with tape, which is perfectly alright. So you wrap it up, you've got about 1/2 inch there. So for this part, you're probably going to have to cut several times. So I cut like one there, one there, one there, and then probably one on this curve here. So I now have all those pieces now cut out. So I'm just going to curl all these up just like I did on the sides and then attach them with different pieces of tape so that'll allow that entire spot just to curve around just like the sides here. So take a few strips and attach all those pieces right now. So now we have all the back pieces connected, and as you can tell, that rounds really nicely just all the way around, just like that. Don't worry about all these little points and everything sticking up. As long as the base line around it is 1/2 inch high, you won't have any problems with that, and we'll trim all that off later. So now we're going to work on the part of the shoe that is the toe. So basically what we're going to do is cut out a couple strips that are about as wide as your shoe here. I would say probably about there. Usually what I'm going to do is I take a pen here and I actually make a mark across, and basically like I showed you on my shoes before, I'll pull up the shoe here, this is the part where the white part is actually going to be underneath. So just measure that however far you want it, and then we'll basically get started here on making the strips. So we have that mark on the shoe there, on the cardboard. Cut out a few strips here that are roughly about the size of that shoe, about the width of the shoe there. It's always better to make them just a little bit longer just in case, because you can always trim any excess off. It's always a little bit harder to add strips of tape to something that's already made rather than just trimming a little bit off. So we're just going to overlap by about 1/4 inch. Now here's the real interesting part, because basically what we're doing, we're not actually wrapping all the way around to that line yet. We're actually continuing this 1/2 inch trim all the way around, at least at the moment. So we're going to put this on an angle right here. Make sure it's about 1/2 inch on the part, which should be right about there. Stick it down, and then stick it down the back here. And obviously that covers all the cardboard there. So now we have about a 1/2 inch right there. So we're going to do a little bit more of that cutting just to make sure that it all is able to bend fairly nicely on there. So I cut about 4 places there. So you can wrap it up. Then just take a bunch of strips. So you're going to stick one there, pull this up, attach one there, and then attach one over here. So it makes it curved just like the back is curved right here. So do that step now, cut about a whole bunch of little strips, and then attach that front part. So once we stick all those little strips down, we now have the front part of the toe all nice and curved like the back. So this would be a perfect time to put this one aside and work on your other one, so you get the other, if you're following so far, you have these parts on the other one already complete, as well, and the back and the front haven't been done yet. So I would do the back and the front on your other shoe, and basically, I don't know if you've noticed, but basically, obviously this, this doesn't reach to this line here, but actually what we're going to be doing is actually making a separate piece which will actually wrap over this and come to that line there. So it kind of actually, this is the wall, if you can imagine, it goes straight up, and then there's actually going to be another piece that actually goes straight over at a right angle, which is going to go over like this. So basically, if you make this ½ an inch, that's basically how much room your toes are going to have when they're actually sticking inside the thing there. If you make it like an inch, you're going to have a little more room, and so on and so forth. You make 3/4 of an inch. I usually go with about ½ an inch or 3/4 of an inch, usually enough room for my toes. But you can make it a little bit higher, and that'll give you a little more room when you eventually put that other flap, which is going to go straight across and ending right there on that line. So basically now we're going to end up making that extra flap, and then we're going to wrap it over and end up at that line. So that's going to be our next step. So to make the toe piece that's going to wrap around the front here, I basically just did the exact same step that I did. I cut out those 3 more 4-inch strips, which were the length of the side we did here. And basically, I just stuck them together the exact same way, 2 strips and then one at the end here. Don't worry if you get too many wrinkles, especially if they're on the bottom, because no one's going to see those except your toes. So basically what I do here is I take this piece, kind of line it up with that line, wherever your line is at, and then I kind of with my hand here just kind of stick it roughly on the back here where it's going to end up. So making sure that it folds to the end there. Once again, make sure that it lines up with that line, which it does. So at that point, you can just kind of wrap it very slowly around the front piece here, and then you'll pretty much from this point get your part of your wall, which will go straight up like this. You can see the part of the wall there, and then this part will obviously flap around. That'll be that part that goes right over top. So obviously, it lines right up with that line, which is great. Now we're going to take a few strips. We're going to cut it so that it comes more or less to a rounded shape on both edges. Okay, so if you have any little sticky parts in here that are bothering you, this would definitely be the time take a few little strips and just kind of seal those up, because at this point we're pretty much going to seal this closed here, and it'll be really hard to stick stuff inside there once you get this all sealed up. So we're going to line this up with the line there. This is where we're going to curve that ½ part on the side here over like this. And it's going to be kind of tricky to do it with one hand, but you're basically just going to stick this on the top here. And then you're going to line it right up with the side here, and then just stick it right around like this. And you might get a little bit of a rounded thing at the point here, but that's perfectly fine, because we're just going to take our pair of scissors and kind of just round that right off eventually, and stick a different piece of tape right on top of that. So you got our one side, so now we're going to work on the other right here. So doing the other side here is probably going to be a little more difficult just because it's on more of a curve. But basically what you want to do is the exact same thing you did on the other side, making sure that line is lined up. You're going to have a little bit of an excess here just because this is one sheet that was straight across. When we fold it back around, so obviously if it's on an angle, it's going to give you a little bit of trouble. So what you're going to do is you're just going to trim a little bit off. And you kind of want to curve it with obviously the line over here so that it's one giant curve from where your toes will end up. Once you get to there, you can take a few strips of tape, and you can kind of just connect the wall, which is the top here, onto the very top part of the toe part right here. And then obviously you have this part here, I'll show that to you, which is a little bit, needs to be folded up a little bit. So we're going to take another strip, another very small strip, and we're just going to seal that up just like this. And we're going to try to overlap it just a little bit so that we don't end up with a lot of sticky side inside the toe. But you're going to end up with probably just a little bit, because unless you cover up every single little piece, you're going to get a little bit of sticky stuff in there, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. So now we've got that toe completely sealed off. So now this would be an excellent time to put that one aside and make sure that you have exactly the same thing on the other one. And yes, I know these are 2 right feet because this one is actually from another prototype that I'm making, but basically, you take your left foot and your right foot, you want to make sure that they are exactly the same. And you'll notice here that the top of the toe part is actually a lot longer on this side than it is on this side. This one lines up perfectly with that line underneath. You can barely see it because it's in the shadow, but it's right there. And this one is actually farther in. Now it's really easy to correct that because basically what you want to do is you want to make them exactly the same. So if you want it to be that length there, you would just trim in just a little bit, depending on how much you need to trim. And make sure not to cut the sides because it's still stuck down over there. Just trim on the sides just like this, and then just take your pair of scissors and you're just going to cut straight across here, and that'll just make it a lot more even with the other side here. Now, as you can tell now, those are much closer together, and you can actually see the line there again. So if you do end up coming a little bit farther down on the shoe, you can definitely trim a little bit off and make sure that your two shoes are the same. So that's pretty much going to wrap up part 1 of the shoe tutorial. So I will link part 2 over here when it does come up in an annotation. And basically what we're going to do next in part 2 is we're going to make the sides of the shoe and the back, as well as the tongue part and the laces. And that's pretty much going to wrap up all part 2. So check that out when it pops up over there. And I will see you guys over there in part 2. So take care.